Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is The Ice Dragon by George R.R. Martin. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. Though best known for the sweeping political intrigues and brutal realism of A Song of Ice and Fire, George R.R. Martin reveals a more tender, fable-like side in The Ice Dragon, a children's fantasy novella first published in 1980 and later revised in 2007 with illustrations by Louis Royo. Set in the same world as Westeros, though its connection to the Game of Thrones universe remains deliberately ambiguous, the book is a haunting tale of a young girl named Adara and her bond with a mythical creature born of winter's breath. Unlike the sprawling epics Martin is famous for, The Ice Dragon is intimate and focused, resembling a modern fairy tale in tone and structure. Its poetic language and mythical imagery explore themes of loss, loneliness, emotional resilience, and the delicate balance between destruction and salvation. It's a story about growing up too soon, of finding one's place in a world that doesn't seem to offer warmth to the cold-hearted or the broken. Adara, the winter child, becomes a vessel for these emotions, and through her, Martin crafts a narrative that resonates with children and adults alike. There's also a lingering melancholy that underlies the story, a quiet reflection on war, family, and the harshness of nature. While the book lacks the grim political complexity of Martin's more adult work, it carries with it an emotional weight that many readers find deeply affecting. Controversy has occasionally surrounded its marketing, especially when editions tried to position it explicitly as a prequel to A Song of Ice and Fire. Martin himself clarified that while the world may feel familiar, The Ice Dragon is its own tale, unbound from the canonical threads of Westeros. With that in mind, let us step into the frozen stillness of Adara's world, where winter is not just a season, but a mirror to the heart. Adara was born during the fiercest winter anyone could remember. It was the kind of cold that sank into bones and never left. Even as the world thawed in the years that followed, it seemed as though a part of that bitter season remained trapped in her. While other children danced in the heat of summer and splashed in muddy spring puddles, Adara wandered alone through frost-covered fields, her skin cool to the touch, her eyes pale and distant like the northern sky. She didn't laugh often. She didn't cry. She simply existed in a quiet stillness, wrapped in the hush of snow. The villagers whispered, as villagers do. They said that Adara was touched by winter, perhaps even made of it. Her mother had died in childbirth, taken away in the same breath that brought Adara into the world. And so, in some unspoken way, her father, Hal, had always looked at his daughter with a conflicted gaze, love buried beneath layers of grief. He raised her with gentleness, but there was a distance between them that never quite melted. Adara's older siblings, Jeff and Terry, didn't understand her silences or her love of cold things. She wasn't cruel or angry, just separate. When Adara was 4, she saw the ice dragon for the first time. It wasn't a thing of legend to her, as it was to the other children. They told tales of the ice dragon's blue-white wings, of its breath that could freeze a man's soul, of how it rode the northern wind and left shattered trees in its wake. But when Adara saw it, it wasn't terrifying. It was magnificent, Massive and ancient, the dragon soared through the sky like a living glacier, scales gleaming with hoarfrost, its cry sharp and distant like the crack of ice splitting on a frozen lake. That first sighting didn't frighten her. Instead, she watched with a calm fascination, heart untouched by fear. And in the years that followed, as the dragon returned each winter, she waited for it. She ventured further and further from home, into the snowy hills and quiet forests, hoping for a glimpse, a sound, a trace of the great creature's passing. By the time she was 5, the dragon came closer. It would land in the clearing beyond the farm, where the trees stood stripped and stiff in the snow. Adara would sit nearby, unmoving, as the dragon looked at her with eyes like ancient ice. She never spoke. She never moved suddenly. She knew better. There was an understanding between them, something wordless, older than language. The dragon would remain for minutes, then hours, wings folded, steam rising from its nostrils in pale ribbons before it lifted off once more, leaving behind deep impressions in the snow. No one else saw it, no one believed her, but that didn't matter. Adara's connection with the ice dragon deepened as she grew older. At 7, she first dared to touch it, her hand cool against the even colder scales. The dragon did not flinch, nor did Adara. That year, she climbed onto its back. It was a slow process, cautious and silent. She didn't speak, and neither did the dragon. But when it rose into the sky, with her clinging tightly to its ridged back, Adara felt something stir inside her that she'd never known before. Not joy, not exactly, but something close. A stillness within stillness, a moment of belonging. She never told anyone, not her father, not her siblings. She kept it as her own, an untouchable part of her world that no one could take away. But peace, as Adara would learn, is as fragile as morning frost under the sun. Far to the south, war was brewing. The northern territories, where Adara lived, were distant from the turmoil. But the shadow of conflict was beginning to creep across the land. Rumors came with traveling merchants, tales of fire dragons ridden by brutal invaders, of cities burned and kings toppled. Adara heard these whispers with the same quiet detachment she brought to everything. Her world was winter, and war belonged to the flames of the south. Still, her father grew tense. He argued with neighbors about border defenses. Jeff, now almost a man, trained with spear and sword. Even Terry, usually so full of laughter, began to carry a tightness in her voice. The air at home grew heavier, and Adara's winters with the ice dragon became more precious, more necessary. The world was shifting, and somewhere deep inside her, Adara knew that the balance between her icy refuge and the burning tide of change could not hold forever. Winter came again, and with it, the silence Adara knew so well. The land froze over, rivers locked in crystalline slumber, and the trees stood like white statues, draped in snow. Other children groaned at the bitter cold, but Adara welcomed it like an old friend. She walked the same winding path through the frozen woodlands, her boots crunching quietly on the hardened ground, eyes scanning the pale sky for wings. This time, she didn't have to wait long. The ice dragon descended through a veil of flurries, as if the snow had summoned it. Its wings spread wide, enormous and glinting, and the wind that accompanied its landing pushed the trees back in a groaning hush. Adara stood at the edge of the clearing, breath visible in the air, her small hands pressed to her chest. The dragon landed before her, great and still, its breath emerging in thick, frozen clouds. She stepped forward. There was no fear there never had been, only a curious reverence. The beast lowered its head and she reached out, her fingers brushing against the frozen ridges of its face. The touch was cold but familiar, somehow comforting. She closed her eyes and leaned in, her forehead resting against the dragon's rough skin. Neither of them moved. In that moment, the world seemed to still, caught in the delicate hush of falling snow and slow breaths. Every winter brought a deeper connection. The dragon allowed her closer each year. Longer flights, higher climbs. Sometimes they soared above the treetops, far from the village and the farm. The land spread out beneath them in a white expanse, dotted by frozen lakes and jagged hills. Adara's hair whipped in the wind, but she never complained. She felt weightless up there, riding atop a creature that seemed to be made of the same stillness that lived inside her. She didn't need to speak. The dragon didn't need to understand words. Their bond ran deeper than language. But even as winter wrapped the world in quiet, change stirred in the distance. The war in the south was growing bolder. Smoke rose from burned villages, carried by terrified messengers who traveled north with blood on their clothes and dread in their eyes. The fire dragons, they said, were real. Red and gold, vast and cruel. Their riders swept across the lands with fire and fury, leaving blackened earth behind. Adara listened when her father spoke with the neighbors, when men gathered in tight groups and spoke in hard voices. They were preparing, stockpiling food, strengthening fences, sharpening blades. Her brother, Jeff, now a young man, practiced daily with his spear. Terry braided her hair with a worried expression and no longer laughed with the same freedom. Their little home was quieter now, not the peaceful kind Adara cherished, but the tense quiet before a storm. Her father tried to shield her from the details, but he underestimated how much she saw, how much she understood without needing explanations. She knew fear when she saw it. She felt it in her father's distracted silences, and in the way Jeff began to carry his weapon even at dinner. Even the livestock seemed nervous, as if the wind itself carried warnings. She spent more and more time with the ice dragon, finding solace in the crisp air and the high, lonely places they flew to. The dragon had grown more protective of her, circling back more often during flights, landing closer to the farmhouse, remaining longer than it used to. Sometimes, it stood watch while she sat on a rock and traced patterns in the snow with a stick, lost in thought. She often wondered what it saw when it looked at her. A kindred spirit, a child of frost, perhaps just a fragile thing that reminded it of something long forgotten. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the shadows stretched across the icy landscape, her father came to her in the field where she sat waiting. He was bundled in a thick fur coat, his face weathered and worn. He didn't say much at first, just looked at her for a long moment, then sat beside her. For once, he didn't try to break the silence. Eventually, he spoke, his voice low. He told her the war was moving closer, that their peaceful northern lands were no longer safe. That soon, men would come riding dragons that burned the sky red. He told her that he needed her to stay close to home, not to wander so far into the woods, not to ride away on frost-covered wings. Adara listened, her face still and unreadable. Her father reached for her hand, and she let him take it. His was warm, hers cold. He didn't pull away. She wanted to ask what he expected her to do when the warmth of home felt less like a comfort and more like a cage. She wanted to tell him that the dragon wasn't just a beast. It was the only thing that ever truly made her feel like she belonged. But she said nothing. Words had never come easily to her. As they sat in silence, snow began to fall again. Light at first, then thicker. Her father stood and looked up toward the trees, as if sensing something. And then, in the distance, the soft, familiar rush of great wings. The ice dragon landed at the edge of the field, just out of reach, its eyes fixed on Adara. Her father turned to her, startled, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, he whispered her name, as if realizing, perhaps for the first time, that there were parts of his daughter he had never truly seen. Adara stood and took a step forward, then paused. She looked back at him. "I'll be careful," she said. Her voice, when it came, was steady and quiet, like the winter wind. Then she turned, walking into the snow toward the creature that waited in silence, cloaked in frost and sky. The snow was deeper than usual that morning. It came down in thick flakes, turning the world into a soft, white dream where sound barely traveled and everything seemed still and slow. Adara rose early, slipping out of bed before her siblings stirred. She walked past the hearth, where the fire had died down to embers, and out into the cold without a word. The snow clung to her boots as she moved silently through the yard, the ice dragon already a distant shape on the horizon, waiting. She found it near the edge of the frostwood, standing motionless in a clearing surrounded by snow-laden trees. Its body shimmered like glass, catching the pale morning light. Steam curled from its nostrils, freezing as it touched the air. She approached without hesitation, and the dragon lowered itself, letting her climb onto its back. They rose together into the sky, slicing through clouds of frost and sunlight. Higher and higher they soared, until the world below was nothing but a vast, silent sea of white. Up here, above it all, the noise and fear of war, of people and their petty cruelties, could not reach her. She leaned into the dragon's neck, her arms wrapped around it tightly, and felt the deep rhythm of its breath beneath the icy ridges of its skin. As they flew, her mind drifted to the stories her brother told by candlelight of fire dragons, of battles in the southern skies, of cities turned to ash. Jeff spoke with excitement, hungry for glory. But she had seen what war truly looked like in their father's eyes. The exhaustion, the sorrow. He had once fought long ago, and the scars he carried were not all visible. Even in sleep, he sometimes muttered to ghosts. The ice dragon banked to the east, gliding over the frozen lake. Adara saw a group of deer below, clustered near the edges where the water hadn't yet hardened. They lifted their heads at the sound of wings and bolted. She smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but because even the most silent things knew to run when death approached. It was then that she saw it, a dark shape on the horizon. Not a cloud, not a bird, something larger, something burning. The dragon circled, uneasy. Its breath came sharper now, its wings beating faster. Adara's heart pounded in her chest as the shape drew closer. She could see the glow of fire trailing behind it like a comet's tail. And then she saw it clearly, a fire dragon. It was massive, its scales red as blood, and its eyes like twin furnaces. Flames licked its jaws as it cut through the sky with terrifying speed. Riding upon it was a man clad in black armor, his face hidden behind a helmet adorned with horns. He held a long, gleaming spear and leaned forward, urging the dragon lower, toward the valley where Adara's home lay nestled in the snow. She clutched the ice dragon's neck tighter. They had to warn the village. Her father, Jeff, Terry, everyone. The ice dragon turned sharply, descending in a blur. The cold air lashed her cheeks, but she didn't care. The wind roared around them as they cut through the sky, racing the fire that followed behind. By the time they reached the farmhouse, the fire dragon was already visible to those below. Adara saw her father in the yard, shouting orders, waving villagers toward the barn where they had stored their few weapons. Jeff was there too, gripping his spear, his face pale but set with determination. The ice dragon landed with a thundering crunch of snow and ice. Adara jumped down and ran to her father, breathless. "It's coming," she said. "It's almost here." He nodded, barely glancing at the dragon. There was no time for questions, no time for wonder. Only the grim work of survival. The fire dragon descended with a screech that split the sky. Its flames licked the air even before it landed, scorching the earth in sweeping arcs. Trees exploded into fire. The snow hissed and vanished in clouds of steam. The villagers scattered. Some screamed. Others fell. Adara watched as Jeff rushed forward, spear raised, face alight with reckless courage. He never reached the fire dragon. A burst of flame caught the ground near his feet and sent him sprawling. She screamed his name, but the roar of battle swallowed her voice. The ice dragon leapt into the air, a low growl rumbling from its chest like the grinding of glaciers. It climbed swiftly, turning in midair to face the intruder. The fire dragon met it with a roar of its own, and the two beasts collided above the fields in a crash of claws and wings and fury. Adara could only watch as frost met flame in a terrible dance. The sky was torn by their cries, the air filled with smoke and shards of ice. The fire dragon spewed gouts of flame, searing the clouds. The ice dragon answered with breath so cold it turned the fire to mist. They clawed and bit and struck at each other, each trying to dominate the sky. The villagers below scrambled for cover. Adara's father pulled her to the barn, shielding her with his arms as ash and ice rained down. She tried to break free, desperate to see the battle unfold, but he held her tightly. "You can't help it," he shouted over the roar, but she wasn't sure he was right. She had always been a part of the cold. It ran through her veins. It gave her breath in the stillness where others shivered. And the ice dragon had always known it. That's why it came to her, year after year. She broke from her father's grasp and ran back into the snow, toward the clearing where she first met the beast. She didn't know what she would do, only that she had to be there. She had to be close, because something was changing. The warmth of fire was threatening to melt everything that had ever made her feel alive. She reached the edge of the woods and looked up. The dragons were locked again, circling, talons clashing, breath scorching the sky. Then the fire dragon landed hard, throwing up smoke and snow. It turned its burning eyes on the girl in the field, and it saw her. The fire dragon's gaze was like a searing brand, locking onto the girl standing alone in the field. Its nostrils flared, breathing out smoke and embers that blackened the snow in bursts. Even from the distance, the heat radiated outward in heavy, invisible waves, wilting the frost that clung to Adara's hair and lashes. She stood her ground, fists clenched at her sides, her breath rising in soft plumes. She had never faced a fire like this before, never been the target of something so ancient and filled with rage. And yet she didn't move. The dragon's great wings beat the air as it took a single step forward. Its rider, a dark figure swathed in smoke-colored armor, shifted in the saddle, lowering the gleaming spear in his hand. From the shadows of his helmet, Adara could feel his eyes upon her as keenly as she felt the heat. She could not hear what he said, but she understood his intent. He thought she was weak, a child, alone, but she wasn't alone. With a shriek like cracking glaciers, the ice dragon dove from the clouds, plunging into view with the force of a blizzard. Its wings cleaved the sky, sending swirling eddies of frost downward. It landed between Adara and the fire dragon, the earth groaning beneath its weight. Steam erupted where its icy claws met scorched ground, and frost crept outward from its limbs, freezing the grass and soot-laced snow into diamond-hard crystal. The fire dragon roared, a noise that split the air like thunder. Flames erupted from its jaws, but the ice dragon met it with a freezing gust that turned the fire into thick clouds of vapor, muffling the world in white. The two dragons lunged again, claw meeting claw, teeth snapping, wings battering the sky. The heat and cold clashed in violent bursts, sending shockwaves through the valley. Adara fell to her knees, her hands buried in the snow. The world trembled beneath her, as if the very land were afraid. She looked up to see the two dragons tangled in midair again, the fire dragon twisting and coiling, trying to burn its way through the frost. The ice dragon retaliated with gusts of breath so cold they cracked stone and froze the scorched trees where they stood. The village was in chaos. Smoke curled from rooftops, and the sky above the barn was lit with flickering orange. Her father was shouting orders, helping people flee toward the woods, while Jeff limped through the snow, his spear clutched tightly, his eyes fixed on the sky. But Adara couldn't tear her gaze away from the ice dragon. It was changing, not in shape or size, but in movement. Its wings were slower now, as if the warmth had begun to gnaw at its strength. Its icy scales, once bright as polished crystal, looked dulled around the edges, stained gray by ash. The cold that poured from its mouth didn't reach as far as before. And with each clash, the fire dragon seemed to grow stronger, its flames hungrier, more confident. Adara felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from something deeper, a growing fear that the frost might not be enough. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling. The wind stung her eyes, her heart pounded, each beat screaming for her to run, but she refused. She took a step toward the dragons, then another. The ground was slick with melted snow, but she didn't stop. The heat pressed against her like a wall, blistering her skin, but she walked through it, because she understood something now. The ice dragon had never belonged to her. She had belonged to it. The moment she was born in that brutal winter, when her mother had died and her cry rose into the snow-filled air, the ice dragon had come. Not as a beast to tame, but as something more ancient than the fire, as a watcher, as a guardian, as a part of her. The fire dragon noticed her again. It turned, momentarily abandoning its foe, and with a great sweep of its wings began to descend. It meant to finish what it started. The rider lifted his spear once more, the flames around him pulsing like a heartbeat. But the ice dragon would not allow it. With a cry like the wind from a frozen sea, it rose again, faster than before, its body glowing faintly now with a pale blue light that shimmered from within. It struck the fire dragon midair, knocking it sideways. The two creatures plummeted toward the earth in a tumbling spiral. They landed hard, a shockwave ripping through the field. Trees cracked and fell. Fire hissed against ice. The very snow began to melt and freeze all at once. Adara ran toward them, eyes wide, lungs burning. She felt every step as though the land itself resisted her presence. But she didn't stop. The dragons were locked together in a death embrace, neither yielding. The ice dragon's wings were shattered now, but its jaws were clamped tight on the fire dragon's throat. Flames poured from the creature's mouth, engulfing the clearing. She screamed for it to stop. She begged the cold to return, to rise up and protect what it loved. And something listened. The sky darkened. The wind turned. From the north, a new storm swept in, fierce and sudden. Snow whipped the field, burying flame. Ice slicked over scorched earth. And in that moment, the fire dragon let out one last, strangled roar. Then there was silence. The flames dimmed. The heat receded. The fire dragon slumped to the ground, motionless, its wings twitching once, then going still. The rider lay several feet away, his armor cracked and smoking. The snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Adara stumbled forward until she reached the ice dragon. Its body was still. Steam rose from deep cracks along its chest and side. She fell to her knees beside it, her small hands reaching out to the rough, frozen scales. Its eye opened just once and met hers. Inside it, she saw not pain, but peace. The same peace that filled the air after the first snow. And then the eye closed. The sky was a dull, ashen gray in the aftermath of the battle, and the snow fell softly, blanketing the field where fire and frost had clashed. Smoke curled from the scorched earth, but even the smoke had grown weary, its tendrils drifting lazily before vanishing into the heavy air. Adara sat beside the ice dragon's still form, her small figure dwarfed by the massive body of the creature she had always believed would never die. The frost had returned to the land, gently reclaiming what the fire had tried to consume, but it brought no comfort. Not now. Her hand rested on the dragon's side, where its scales had cracked open during the final strike. There was no warmth, of course, but there was no more chill either. Just stillness. A deep and terrible stillness that soaked into her bones like the winter itself had paused to mourn. She pressed her palm harder against the dragon's chest, willing it to rise, to move, to breathe. But it didn't. The only sound was the soft sigh of snow settling. In the distance, the villagers began to emerge from the shadows of the woods and ruined buildings. They walked with slow, hesitant steps, their faces etched with awe and confusion. They had seen the sky burn and freeze all in a single breath, had watched dragons descend like gods of old from storybooks and nightmares. Many had thought they would never live to see the sun again. And now, as they stepped into the field, they saw the girl at the heart of it all. Adara didn't notice them at first. She didn't hear her father's voice when he called her name, broken and raw with worry. He ran to her, falling to his knees beside the dragon. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, but she didn't move. Her eyes were on the dragon's frozen face, and she felt as though something vast and irreplaceable had been torn from the sky and shattered at her feet. Only when he whispered her name again, quieter this time, did she blink and look up. His face was pale, lined with soot and grief, but his eyes were full of love. There was a question in them, a silent plea to know if she was still his daughter, if she had returned from wherever that great storm of ice and fire had taken her. And she was. She had changed, yes. She had touched something few ever would, had ridden on wings carved from winter's heart. But at her core, she was still the girl he had raised. She nodded, barely, and his eyes closed in relief. Others gathered around, some kneeling, some standing in hushed reverence. Jeff stepped forward, leaning on his broken spear. His face was filled with awe, and maybe fear too, for Adara had been strange to him before. But now, after witnessing her call down the very winter to battle flame, she was something else entirely. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. There were none that could measure what had just occurred. The rider of the fire dragon had not survived. His body lay still beneath a broken tree, his armor melted into twisted shapes by the force of the ice dragon's breath. No one dared approach him. Whatever kingdom he had served, whatever cause had brought him to their quiet valley, it no longer mattered. He had come with fire and fury, and now he lay as cold as the field around him. They buried the ice dragon on the hill beyond the orchard, where the snow never melted, and the trees stood tall and bare like silent sentinels. It took many hours, and the ground was frozen solid, but the villagers worked without complaint. They dug with reverence, with sorrow, and when the grave was deep enough, they built a cradle of stones at the bottom and laid the dragon within it. Adara stayed beside it the whole time. She touched its snout one last time before the snow began to cover it, and she whispered something that only the winter wind could hear. When the final stone was placed, and the last mound of snow packed firm, the people stepped back in silence. The sky had begun to lighten, the sun peeking timidly through the thick clouds. It cast a pale light across the hill, and for a moment, the frost shimmered like diamonds, as if the dragon were still breathing beneath the ice. In the days that followed, the valley tried to return to normal. The barn was rebuilt, roofs were mended, and fences restored. But nothing truly returned to what it had been. Children no longer played as loudly in the fields, and when people passed by Adara, they spoke to her softly, gently, with a kind of reverence they hadn't before. She had been a quiet girl, a strange one, a child of winter, but now she was something else. She had faced a dragon of fire and walked away with frost still clinging to her lashes. Her father watched her differently too. He was more careful, more patient. There was something unspoken between them now, a deep understanding forged in the crucible of that night. He no longer tried to pull her away from her silence or her wandering walks into the snow. He let her be who she was, because now he finally understood that her coldness wasn't a wound or a wall. It was part of her. As for Adara, she returned often to the dragon's grave. She would sit on the hilltop in the falling snow, sometimes with a book, sometimes with nothing but her thoughts. The cold didn't bite at her the way it did others. It wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. She would close her eyes and listen to the wind, and sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she could still hear wings in the sky. The seasons moved on. The spring tried to come, but its warmth was gentler that year, hesitant in the face of the lingering frost. Flowers grew only at the edges of the village, never near the hill, and the children whispered stories about a girl who had once flown on the back of a dragon made of ice. Adara never told them otherwise. The passage of time softened the edges of the villagers' memories. But for Adara, the silence of winter never truly ended. Though the world moved forward, crops planted, animals birthed, laughter heard once more beneath the eaves of rebuilt homes, she carried with her the stillness of that icy farewell. Life returned, yes, but something deep within her remained frost-bound, untouched by spring's thaw. She did not weep, nor did she rage. Instead, she simply became quieter, more watchful. Children watched her from afar, unsure whether she was one of them anymore. They whispered stories of the dragon, stories that grew taller with each retelling. Some claimed Adara had commanded a whole army of ice beasts. Others swore she had flown above the clouds, where even birds dared not go. She never corrected them. In their tales, she heard echoes of her own heart, trying to make sense of what had been lost. Her father, ever watchful, tried in small, clumsy ways to bridge the distance that had formed. He began to speak more gently, to ask about her dreams, to leave little surprises for her on the windowsill. A carved bird, a ribbon of pale blue, a storybook from the city. And though she never said much in return, Adara noticed. The warmth of his efforts was quiet but real, and she accepted it in her own way. On days when the sky turned a certain gray and the wind felt like memory, she would sit with him on the porch steps and watch the clouds move. Neither spoke, and yet everything was said. The hill where the ice dragon lay became sacred ground. Adara visited often, never out of ritual, but because something in her heart needed to be near. She would sit in the snow, legs curled beneath her, and stare at the wind-swept ridge where the frost never melted. Birds did not perch there. Animals kept their distance. Yet to Adara, it was the most peaceful place in the world. Sometimes she brought trinkets, a polished stone, a shard of crystal, a frost-laced leaf. She would place them on the mound in silence, offerings that no one else would understand. One afternoon, as she sat tracing circles in the snow with her fingertip, Jeff approached. He had not spoken to her since that night, the fear in his eyes having given way to something quieter, curiosity perhaps, or even guilt. His boots crunched softly through the crusted snow, and when she glanced up, he looked uncertain. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said finally, voice low. Adara blinked slowly, watching him. "You didn't," he exhaled. "I didn't know what you were, what you could do." She tilted her head slightly, not angry, just curious. "Neither did I." There was a silence, and then he knelt beside her, glancing at the frozen mound. "Was it really alive, the way you said? Not just cold and fierce, but alive?" Adara looked at the place where the ice dragon slept beneath the snow and nodded. "It wasn't like the others. It didn't roar or burn. It just was like the winter sky, like breath in the air." Jeff nodded, his brow furrowed. "It saved us. You saved us." "No," she replied quietly. "It chose to." Another silence stretched between them, and then Jeff stood. "I'm sorry I was cruel before." She gave him a small nod in return. "So was I." When he left, the wind picked up, brushing her cheeks with cold fingers. She closed her eyes and leaned into it. It felt familiar, not harsh or biting, but soft, like the breath of something vast and sleeping. The world moved on, and so would she, but not in the way others did. She didn't need to chase noise or warmth. She had found peace in the still places of the earth. One evening, long after the fields had turned to green and the sun hung lower in the sky, her father came to her holding a letter. It was sealed with dark wax and bore the crest of a distant city. War had returned elsewhere in the realm, far from their valley, but close enough that it stirred unrest. The lords of neighboring lands, having heard of the battle with the fire dragon, now turned curious eyes toward Adara's home. They wanted answers. Some wanted protection. Others wanted power. The letter requested an audience with the girl who rode the dragon. Adara read it in silence, the parchment crisp in her hands. Her father watched her anxiously, his calloused fingers twisting the edge of his sleeve. "You don't have to go," he said. "They don't know who you really are. They just want a weapon." Adara didn't respond at first. She turned to the window, where the late light played across the frost-rimmed panes. Outside, a few late flowers struggled to bloom near the base of the hill. They were beautiful, but fragile, so easily broken by the cold. "They're afraid," she said finally, "of fire, of war. They think I can stop it." "And can you?" he asked softly. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know." But even as she said it, something inside her stirred. Not power, not pride, responsibility. She had touched something elemental, had lived through something few could imagine. And though she had lost the ice dragon, she still carried its echo inside her, the way the wind moved when it flew, the sound of its wings in the dark, the feeling of cold that didn't wound, but shielded. She would not ride again, not as she had before. But perhaps she didn't need to. There were other kinds of strength and other ways to shape the world. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the hearth. Then she looked to the window one last time, where the moon had begun to rise above the ridge, and she listened. The weeks that followed the letter's arrival were filled with an uneasy stillness. It was the kind of quiet that came not from peace, but from anticipation, the sort that gathered in the bones and lingered on the skin like the chill before a storm. Adara moved through her days unchanged in the eyes of others, but within her, the weight of expectation had begun to settle. No one in the village asked her directly about the letter, but their glances lingered longer now. Their words stopped short when she passed. They waited, watching for a sign, for her to become what the outside world believed she already was. Her father kept the letter hidden in the drawer beneath his bed, as if its presence there could ward off the world beyond the hills. He never spoke of it again, and neither did Adara. But its message echoed between them, unspoken, yet always present. She knew he feared losing her again, not to dragons or fire this time, but to men in armor and stone halls who would twist her into something she wasn't. The days grew longer, summer at last making its presence known, though the winds remained strange, cooler than they should have been, bearing whispers from distant mountains. When Adara walked to the edge of the forest in the early morning, dew clung to her skin longer than it did others, and frost still bloomed in her footsteps when no one else was watching. The ice was still a part of her, quiet now, buried deep, but present. One night, the village elder came to visit. He was a man of few words and many winters, his hair like ash and eyes sharp as river stones. He sat beside Adara's father near the fire, and though their voices were low, Adara heard every word from her perch on the stairs above. "They'll send more letters," the elder warned, "and then riders, then soldiers. They won't forget what she did." "She's a child," her father said. "She saved us. That should be enough." "They don't want her story. They want her power." Adara closed her eyes, her small hands tightening around the rail. She didn't feel powerful. She felt like snow caught between seasons, melting, forming again, unsure whether to stay or vanish. Later that night, her father found her awake, sitting on the porch steps beneath the stars. He sat beside her in silence, letting the darkness do the speaking for them. Only when the moon had climbed high did she finally whisper, "If they come, will you stop them?" He looked at her, eyes tired. "I'll try." "But will I let you?" she asked, not turning her gaze from the stars. He said nothing. That was his answer. In the days that followed, Adara began to prepare in quiet, subtle ways. She visited the ridge more often, lingered longer at the frozen mound. The snow never melted there. Beneath it, the form of the dragon remained hidden, but she could still feel its presence, the way one feels the shape of a mountain beneath the fog. It was not asleep, it was gone. And yet, one morning, Adara found something unexpected. Where she had placed her small offerings, stones, feathers, bits of silver ice, there now sat a single shard of crystal. It shimmered in the light, faintly blue, so cold to the touch it numbed her fingers instantly. It hadn't been there before. No footprints marked the snow around it. No wind could have brought it. She held it up to her eye, and for a moment, she saw something move inside, a flicker of white wings, the faint echo of a roar that did not sound like fury, but like sorrow. It was not just memory. It was a message. She took the shard home and placed it on the wooden chest where she kept her few belongings. That night, she dreamed of snowfields that stretched forever, and of stars falling into ice-laced valleys. The dragon was not in her dream, and yet its shadow curled through the sky like breath. When she awoke, her window was frosted despite the heat of summer. The next week, the riders came. 3 of them, cloaked in silver and blue, their horses heavy with metal and pride. They bore no weapons openly, but the air around them felt sharp. They were courteous, polished, and full of rehearsed humility. They spoke to the village elder first, then to her father. Finally, they asked to speak with Adara. She met them near the edge of the fields, where the wheat grew in trembling lines. The villagers watched from a distance, pretending not to listen. "We come with respect," said the leader, a man with a long face and polished gloves. "The realm remembers what happened here, what you did, and they wonder what else you could do." Adara met his eyes. "Why?" He blinked. "The fire drakes return in the south. Cities fall, crops burn. They ask if the girl of ice might stand against the fire again. And if I don't want to," the man's smile faltered. "The realm has many ways to encourage duty." Adara stepped closer, so the wind tugged at her hair. "The realm didn't save my village. I did." He bowed his head. "We only ask that you come with us to learn, to train. You have a gift. We can help you master it." She thought of the ice dragon, of its silent wings and pale blue eyes. It had never needed training. It had never taken orders. "I already know who I am," she said quietly. "And I don't belong in your castles." The man opened his mouth, but Adara turned and walked away. She did not run, did not flinch when he called after her. The fields parted before her, the wheat bowing slightly as she passed. And when she looked back, she saw frost blooming in the footprints she left behind. That night, a hush blanketed the village, but it was not the comforting silence of peace. It was the hush that follows confrontation, the kind that hovers like a breath held too long. The villagers said little, pretending that the rider's visit had been nothing more than formality, a gesture of gratitude from a distant king. But in every wary glance and hushed conversation, the truth lingered. They knew the eyes of the realm had turned toward them, and more dangerously, toward her. Adara sat on her rooftop, legs curled beneath her, watching the moon rise like a pale coin above the treetops. The wind stirred gently, and she tilted her head as if listening for something deeper hidden in its whisper. All she heard was the rustling of leaves and the soft murmur of her own breath. But in her chest, something restless stirred. She had spoken the truth when she said she didn't belong in castles. Those stone towers, cold though they might be, were a different kind of cold, a hollow chill that came from walls designed to hold power, not understanding. She belonged somewhere else, not with kings, nor courts, nor teachers of magic. Her gift did not come from books or scrolls. It came from the sky, from silence, from grief. Her father didn't mention the riders again, though Adara noticed how he lingered longer at the window now, how his axe was kept sharper, how his glances toward the horizon had become more frequent. He understood, even if he didn't say it aloud. He had tried to give her a quiet life, and for a time he had succeeded. But quiet lives were not built for children who rode ice dragons. In the days that followed, Adara returned often to the frozen ridge, though the dragon had long since departed. She walked among the skeletal trees, traced the delicate frost etched on bark and stone. The silence there was comforting, not ominous. It was the place where she felt closest to whatever it was that stirred within her. One morning, the frost bloomed stronger than before, thicker, brighter, with crystalline patterns lacing the grass, like a message written in another language. She knelt beside one patch of ice and placed her fingers against it. It didn't sting. It welcomed her, cool and familiar, as though she were returning to something she had never truly left. And then she saw it, a footprint in the snow. Not hers, too large. The edges glistened faintly with blue light, and within its depth, she saw the faint shimmer of scales. A dragon's print. Her heart quickened. The ice dragon had returned. She followed the trail, careful, silent. Her breath steamed in the morning air, but the path ahead was already coated in a fine dusting of frost, suggesting the dragon's passage had been recent. As she climbed the ridge, her pulse beat like a drum in her ears, not from fear, but from a strange exhilaration, like reuniting with an old friend after years apart. And there it was. Perched atop the highest rise, wings folded like curtains of mist, the dragon waited. Its body shimmered with the pale blues and silvers of deep ice, its eyes glowing faintly like stars caught in the storm. It didn't move as she approached. It didn't need to. There was no fear between them, no uncertainty, only recognition. She stood before it, and the wind circled her like a cloak. The dragon lowered its head slightly, a gesture of greeting, and Adara reached out, her hand resting against the smooth curve of its muzzle. The cold seeped through her skin, not as pain, but as a deep, resonant calm. She felt, in that touch, everything she had once believed lost: connection, purpose, a strange kind of belonging that no human words could ever describe. She leaned her forehead against the dragon's snout and closed her eyes. For a long time, they remained like that, two beings bound by something older than names or blood. She didn't speak, and neither did it. There was no need. The silence said everything, but the moment couldn't last. A sound reached her ears, distant hooves, faint clinks of armor. The riders had returned, this time not to ask, this time perhaps to take. Adara looked to the east, where the faint plume of dust marked the road into the valley. They were coming quickly, too quickly. And though she had denied them, she knew they would not stop. They would not understand that her gift was not theirs to shape. The dragon shifted, its wings twitching. It had heard them too. Adara stepped back and placed her hand flat against its chest. "Not yet," she whispered. "We don't fight unless we must." The dragon exhaled, and a wave of frost spread outward from its breath, coating the ridge in sparkling ice. The wind answered with a howl, and somewhere in the forest, branches snapped under the weight of cold that had no place in summer. Adara descended the ridge as the dragon took to the sky, silent and vast. It flew high, hidden within the sun's glare, invisible to all who didn't know where to look. She reached the village just as the first riders came into view, this time 5 of them. They rode without pretense. There were no words of gratitude, no gestures of peace. They came armed, expressions grim. Her father stepped forward to meet them, axe in hand, but Adara placed a hand on his arm. She stepped forward alone. "We offered you a place in the realm," said the leader, a woman this time, her armor etched with frost-shaped designs. "You refused, but the threat grows. Your power must serve the realm. It is not yours to hide." Adara looked past her toward the woods, where the air shimmered faintly with cold. "My power isn't something to serve," she said quietly. "It's something to understand. You'll come with us." "No," the woman's expression hardened. "Then you leave us no choice." Adara closed her eyes for only a moment. When they opened again, the wind had shifted. The frost was already spreading across the fields, climbing stalks of wheat and curling around boots and hooves. In the sky above, the ice dragon called, a long, low sound that made every living thing pause. She didn't have to summon it. It had always been listening. The cry of the ice dragon rolled over the valley like a wave of thunder frozen in time. The sound was not a roar, nor a screech, but something older, something elemental. It echoed off the trees, slithered down the hills, and rattled the armor of the soldiers who had dared to march upon this quiet land. The air grew still, then cracked with the sharpness of a sudden drop in temperature. Every breath the villagers took turned white, and the tips of the wheat in the fields glazed over with frost, as if the very season had changed in an instant. The commander's horse reared and neighed, its eyes rolling with panic. Around her, the others gripped their reins tighter, suddenly aware that they had come to a place where their laws and swords meant very little. Adara stood between them and the oncoming wind, her hair dancing in the air, her eyes locked on the sky. From the edge of the clouds, the ice dragon descended. It did not descend with fury or fire. There was no screeching plunge of talons or snapping jaws. Instead, it glided down slowly, wings stretched wide, the air around it shimmering with flakes of ice that sparkled like fragments of stars. Where its shadow touched the earth, frost blossomed delicate, intricate patterns that curled and expanded across grass and stone. The soldiers backed away instinctively, their eyes wide with awe and fear. The dragon was unlike any beast they had seen in their lives. It was not bred for war, nor made for spectacle. It was a creature of sky and winter, ancient and beautiful in a way that could not be harnessed. Adara turned to face them, her voice calm and unwavering. "You came for power. You thought it was a weapon to be claimed, but it's not. It never was." The commander held her ground, though her fingers had turned white around the hilt of her sword. "You don't understand what's at stake. The fire dragons burn entire cities. The king believes this. The king," Adara interrupted, "does not understand winter. You think this is about strength, about control. But some things can't be controlled. Some things simply are." Behind her, the ice dragon touched down, its talons cracking the earth where it landed. Its breath came in great clouds of mist, its wings folding in slow, graceful movements. The air around it dropped further still, and now even the trees nearby glistened with a thin coat of frost. The standoff stretched in silence. The villagers had emerged from their homes now, drawn by the unnatural cold and the dragon's cry. They stood watching from behind fences and half-open doors, unsure whether they were witnessing salvation or the end of everything they'd ever known. Adara stepped forward once more. Her breath misted in the cold, and she felt the dragon's presence behind her like a living shadow, silent, steady, and loyal. "I will not go with you," she said. The commander seemed to weigh her options. Her eyes flicked from the dragon to her men, to the villagers watching from the sidelines. Whatever decision she had come to make, it was slipping from her grasp like snow through fingers. She drew her sword slowly. The moment that blade cleared its sheath, the wind surged. The ice dragon opened its wings, not fully, just enough to let the air remember what it was dealing with. A great gust of wind tore through the clearing, lifting leaves, loose cloth, and powdered snow. The ground trembled, and the sky dimmed, not with darkness, but with a gathering of ice-choked clouds that spun like a vortex above them. One of the soldiers fell from his horse. Another stumbled back, his visor fogged over by the sudden frost. The commander stood her ground only barely, her sword hand shaking. And then the dragon spoke, not in words, not in a voice, but in a sound deep, resonant, a pulse of pure winter. The kind of sound that settled in the bones and whispered to the most primal part of the human mind, "This is not yours." The commander slowly lowered her sword. "We didn't know," she said, not to Adara, but to the sky, to the creature before her. We thought it was like the others." Adara walked to her dragon and placed a hand upon its leg. The ice was cold, but not cruel. She looked over her shoulder once more. "You don't fight ice with fire," she said. "You endure it. You respect it." The woman nodded once, then turned to her soldiers. With a gesture, they mounted their horses. The silence was broken only by the crunch of hooves on frost-covered grass as they withdrew, not in defeat, but in realization. They had come to claim a weapon, and had instead been humbled by a force they could not name. As the last rider disappeared down the valley trail, the sky lightened, and the winds calmed. Adara remained where she stood, one hand resting on the dragon's hide. The villagers approached slowly, their faces uncertain but no longer afraid. They had seen what she truly was, not a threat, not a sorceress, but something older and quieter. A child of winter, a daughter of silence and snow. Her father came to her side. He looked up at the dragon and then down at her, his weathered face soft with both pride and sorrow. "They won't stop," he said gently. "Next time, it might not be riders, it might be armies." Adara nodded. "Then I'll be ready." She didn't say it with bravado. There was no triumph in her voice, just certainty. She was not a warrior. She was not a queen. She was something else entirely, something the world was only beginning to understand. And somewhere far away, in the lands where the fire still raged and dragons with wings of flame scorched the sky, a storm was gathering. Winter, long ignored, was stirring once more. The days that followed were quieter than the storm that had passed. But silence did not mean peace. It was a different kind of stillness now, one weighted with awareness. The villagers went back to their routines, but with glances cast toward the sky and tracks left in the frost that lingered longer than they used to. Children whispered stories of the great blue beast that breathed winter and stood beside the girl with eyes like pale embers. The elders nodded to themselves, recalling legends they'd heard long ago but never believed. Adara did not return to being just a child after that day. Something in her had shifted, not not only in the eyes of others, but within herself. She no longer shrank from the warmth of her siblings or the steady hum of the hearth in winter. Yet she did not give up her quiet, either. She walked the fields when frost clung to the tips of the grass. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried a weight that belied her years. Her father, once worn with worry, came to understand that his daughter stood on the edge of two worlds, one foot planted in a place of ice and wind, and the other in the simple soil of his farm. The ice dragon lingered, sometimes near, sometimes distant. It did not vanish back into legend, nor did it become a pet. It remained itself independent, wild, and vast. But it stayed with her. When Adara stood by the woods and raised her hand, it would come. Not because she summoned it, but because they were bound by something older than language. Autumn deepened and then waned. Leaves fell like golden snow, and the skies grew heavy. Far off, the fire wars were still raging, the flames consuming more than land, taking sons, fathers, and even kings. Rumors came on the wind, wrapped in the words of merchants and travelers. The fire dragons had scorched half the east. Cities had fallen into ash. The fire riders sought dominion, their beasts blackening the heavens wherever they passed. And somewhere amidst the smoke and chaos, whispers of the ice girl and her dragon crept across tongues. Some thought her a myth. Others feared her as the enemy of fire, a threat to one kingdom or another. But those who had come too close, who had felt the sharp bite of winter in her presence, knew better. She was not a weapon of vengeance. She was balance. It was not long before the fire came for her. The horizon bled red one morning, not with sunrise, but with flame. A black shadow crossed the hills, wide wings, scales that gleamed with molten light, and a rider cloaked in fire marked steel. The fields smoldered where the dragon's breath touched them, and trees wept sap like boiling tears. Villagers fled, screaming. Some turned toward the hills where Adara was last seen. She stood atop the northern ridge, barefooted in the frost, her breath calm and slow. She had known it would come to this, that the fire would reach even this far corner of the world. The ice dragon was beside her, silent, its wings folded like a great mantle of snow. The fire dragon shrieked as it descended. Its breath came in ribbons of flame, melting stone and searing the earth. But the frost did not retreat. The grass beneath Adara's feet held firm in its icy coat. The wind rose behind her like a curtain, and the clouds above darkened with a brewing storm. She mounted the ice dragon without words. They rose together, and the sky became a battleground. Flame met frost. Heat collided with cold in bursts that lit up the heavens in a dance of elements, fiery roars and shards of hail, light and shadow clashing like gods at war. The fire dragon struck with ferocity, a beast of rage and destruction. But the ice dragon moved with patience, with control. It did not flail. It did not scream. It simply was unshakable, enduring. Adara felt the frost seep deeper into her skin, not painfully, but with purpose. It was as though she was becoming part of the sky itself. The cold no longer stung, it lived in her. She saw the fire dragon open its jaws once more, felt the heat surge. But before the flame could reach her, her dragon veered upward, circling high, letting the cold settle across the upper air like a veil. And then it dove. Wind screamed past her ears, and the frost gathered at the tip of the dragon's mouth. It did not breathe a single gust, but an entire blizzard. Snow, ice, and a silence so complete it shattered the roar of flame. The fire dragon faltered in the storm, its wings clumsy against the sudden sleet, and for a moment it hung there, caught, struggling, vulnerable. Adara's dragon curved around it, not striking to kill but to subdue, to push it back, to smother its fury with stillness. The rider, shaken, turned and fled. The fire dragon followed, wounded in pride, not flesh. The sky cleared slowly after they vanished beyond the southern clouds. Adara and the ice dragon hovered there in the silence that followed, not victorious, not triumphant, just enduring. She returned to the village without a word. No one cheered, no one spoke. They simply watched, knowing something immense had passed through their lives like a cold wind, and perhaps it would come again. The seasons changed. Adara grew, not into a queen or a warrior, but into something rarer. A bridge between warmth and winter, between fear and strength. She did not chase war, nor did she hide from it. She became a guardian of balance. When the frost came early, she knew how to guide the village. When the fire returned again, as it did years later, she and her dragon rose once more, not to destroy, but to remind the world of what it had forgotten. That winter was not the enemy. It was silence. It was endurance. It was truth. And in the heart of that truth, in the girl who once walked barefoot in the snow because she felt no cold, there lived a story not of war or conquest, but of understanding, of a bond between a girl and a creature born of wind and ice. A legend carried forward on the wings of winter. The ice dragon is a story that transcends the usual boundaries of fantasy. At its heart, it's a tale of balance, of the delicate, often precarious dance between opposing forces. Martin's vivid world, where fire and ice battle for dominance, mirrors the internal struggles of the characters, particularly Adara, who learns to embrace her own unique strength and place in the world. Her journey is not one of traditional heroism, but of quiet resilience, a theme that resonates on a deeply human level. In a world dominated by dragons of flame and fire, breathing creatures of myth, the ice dragon reminds us that true power often lies not in destruction, but in preservation. It is in the stillness of the winter's embrace, in the cold that endures and protects, that we find a different kind of magic, one rooted in patience, understanding, and the courage to stand firm against the storm. Through Adara's connection with the ice dragon, Martin explores the power of connection itself. Not simply the bond between a girl and a mythical beast, but the deeper, more profound connection between oneself and the forces of nature that shape and define us. In the end, the story is a meditation on the complexities of love, loss, and the forces that govern our world, both external and internal. The book's impact lies not in its fantastical creatures, but in its quieter moments, the reflections on fear, survival, and the search for balance in a world that often demands extremes. It teaches us that while we may not control the storms that rage around us, we do have the power to endure, adapt, and find meaning in the quietest corners of our lives. The ice dragon is a reminder that even in the harshest of winters, there is beauty in the stillness and strength in the cold. As we leave the world of Adara and the ice dragon, we are left with a lasting impression of the power of myth, the depth of connection, and the eternal struggle between warmth and winter, a struggle that is not just fought with fire and ice, but with the hearts of those who dare to live within them.